Teacher and adult behavior determines student behavior. So think about what in the past worked. Who were successful people that was able to, you know, when they work with Miss Janie, they don't have explosions, but when they work with Miss Susie, they do. Not that Miss Susie is bad. What's different in those two settings? Maybe it's the task demand. Maybe it's the time of day. We'll talk about how we'll figure out some of those things, but look at what is successful for them in the course of their day. It's really important to know those things. And who, I will tell you, when I was in college, they always said, oh no, anybody can do this, it's all good. But that's a big lie, right? You need good staff. And I know that's so hard right now. It is, it's so hard. Everywhere I go, they're trying to hire assistants. They can't find people to fill the jobs. They can't find teachers to fill the jobs. And you need at least a live, warm body. It's really hard. So I say that knowing sometimes you don't have good control of that. So think about, where are they successful in their day? Maybe it's after school. I had a kid that I worked with that his whole school day was a train wreck. And we talked with his parents and found out that he worked with his dad on a car in the afternoon, and really liked working as a mechanic. He wasn't a mechanic, obviously, but he really liked working on engines and working on cars. And so we found that successive interaction, and we brought it to school, right? We got him into the auto mechanic program in the high school, and started looking at, maybe when we talked about math, we related it back to cars. And sometimes it was, you know, we're adding up cars, or how much does this car cost? Look at where kids are successful at, and their interest. It will pay off in the end. So you all have, and especially if you're online and if you're here, in your folder, if you're here and online, you have this sheet. It's called the Escalation Cycle, and you should be able to find that. And normally, so when I do this for teachers, I have them, we print this out and we actually walk a student through it. Right? So we take a student through and we walk through what we would do for that student. So I will say, I know administrators may have a student in mind, or you might not, you might have multiple students in mind, however you want to do it. I will say, just put this sheet somewhere that is easily accessible for you. It's one page. And I really like it. I think that a lot of school districts that I've done this for, this has become a one-page behavior plan. And I think that's up to each district. I also think it's a really good place to just get a start of, how do we plug in all of the boxes and how do we address all the needs? So it is all of the 7 stages of the escalation cycle, right? And so the top part of that cycle are student behaviors. So this is what the student does, and we'll walk through this as we go. And the bottom part are staff specific or adult responses. So insert teacher, insert OT, you know, assistant, whoever the adult is in that situation. So I really do like this. I like things that are on one page. I don't have to hunt for it or find it if it's a novel. So I think it's a good place to start. And at least we'll prompt. And if you have your own, you know, that you already use, keep on using that. Maybe you can utilize this to prompt in what you would fill into the other one. And I think that's okay too. Whatever works best for you. So, fundamental assumptions. All behavior is learned, right? We learn all behavior. When we were babies, if you live in a functional family and a baby cries, what happens? Mommy, daddy, we pick it up. Does it need changed? Does it need fed? Does it just need comfort? In a functional family, that's what happens, right? So all behavior is learned. So when a baby cries, we're teaching it that something good, someone's going to come and do something for it, right? So the other part of that is if all behavior is learned, then all behavior can be unlearned, right? So if you have a student who has constant cycles of challenging behavior, or whatever that looks like, they've learned somewhere along the way that this is an effective way for them to get what they want. And it works for them. It may look like a train wreck to you, but whatever it's doing, it works for them. And many times kids with disabilities don't care if it's positive attention or negative attention. They don't know the difference. Attention is attention to them. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So here's the challenge. And I always tell early childhood people, early childhood thing, and it is hard, it is very hard, but if a child is 4 years old, they've practiced that cycle of escalating behavior for a much shorter time. When we get into high school, we have to amp up our response, right? We have to amp up our response because they've practiced that behavior for 15 years, 16 years, 25 years, right? If they're an adult, think about, how long they might have practiced that behavior. So the sooner we intervene, the better. And it's not impossible. And I sometimes get people that will ask me and say, oh my gosh, do we even try at this point? Always try, right? Especially if you haven't put good strategies into place in the past. I think there's always hope and you can always try. Some of the stuff that we will talk about today, I use with my mother-in-law who has severe dementia. She is 70, I think she'll turn 79 actually next week. So we use some of these strategies with her just because she has a lot of challenging behavior. She has significant dementia. She doesn't always remember things. So you can always learn something new, right? So all behavior is learned, so therefore it can be unlearned. The other thing is all behavior is lawful. If it gets me what I need and it gets me the student, the things that they are after, then it's working for them. It might not work for anyone else. It definitely might not work for anyone else, but it is working for them. Behavior is escalated through successive interactions, meaning practice. So once that student practices that behavior over and over, it's going to amp up. They're going to be more likely to fall back into that pattern of behavior because it worked for them. So why not? Behavior can be changed through instruction. It's our job, right? We're school districts, we're school systems. It's our job to teach. So we have to teach behavior. And I know we have 3,000 other things that we have to teach. I know the schedules are full. I was in the classroom for, I don't know, 13 or 14 years. I'm not sure. Some of those years are fuzzy. I was in the classroom for a lot of years, but we have to teach behavior because if I have a kid who's melting down all the time, he's interrupting his instruction, he's interrupting everyone else's instruction in the classroom. And if we get into the point of we're talking about kids in self-contained classrooms or kids in moderate and severe disabilities, well, those kids need every minute of the day. They need every single instructional minute that we have because they're already maybe years behind and we need to push them as far as we can go. So, and nobody's wanting this behavior, right? No one wants these things to be happening. And then we just don't know. And for a long time as a teacher, I didn't know what to do. And I fell back onto the things that I was taught. I punished for a lot of years. Kids would misbehave, I would punish. They would come back the next day, they would do the same thing and I would punish. They would come back again, I would punish again because that's what I was taught to do. And the behavior never went away. And finally, one day I said, there has to be something better because this isn't working. This is literally the definition of insanity. It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting to get a different result. And I truly felt insane by the time I got to that point. And I tell teachers, we know the kids that have behavior issues, right? There'll be the kids the very first week of school. You're on the 5th day of school and you already know if you're using the clip charts, you already know the kids that are constantly in the red and the yellow, whatever color indicates a negative response. You already know by the end of the week, those kids that are going to be falling into that difficult and challenging behaviors. And we have to instruct, we have to teach a better way. So responding personally to problem behavior, this is hard, right? We're adults. We went to school a long time. We went to school for a really long time. We know a lot of things. And if kids would just do what we asked them to do, then it would be so much better. And if the adults in our classroom would just do what we ask them to do, it would be so much better. Teachers and staff, we take it personally sometimes. And it's hard. It's very hard not to take things personally because it feels like they're doing it to us. So we have to step aside from that if we can, very much. And when that happens, when we have a child who is pushing our buttons, then we respond in an illogical way, right? And we abandon our best practices and we kind of dump that out and move on to, we fall back on punishment because it's what we know. And when I'm really upset, as an adult and as a person, I'm going to fall back to what I know and what I know to do. So for me, when I finally had this escalating cycle of behavior where it said, all right, I know the kid is in agitation. Here is my response. It gave me a concrete way to respond to that child instead of falling back onto, he's pushed all of my buttons. So now I'm having a really bad day too, because we're human, right? Teachers, school staff, principals, everybody, we're all human and we all have human feelings, and kids hurt them sometimes, you know, or kids do things that just trigger us. The other piece that I will say is know your triggers as an adult. Not only know your kids' triggers, but as an adult, know your own triggers. So I will tell you, I got bitten by a student many, many years ago, and I almost lost my hand. So if I'm in a situation with a child who bites, and I need to give some sort of appropriate response to a child who's biting, then I double check myself, right? I double check myself if I'm working with a kid who bites, because I know that's a trigger for me. And I need to make sure that my response is legal, ethical, moral, and that I'm teaching that child something, right? That my goal here is to teach them something else, or I'm investigating why that happened. So know your own triggers. And sometimes we feel like, well, we shouldn't have triggers. We're the adults, we're above this. We're human, right? We are human and we all have triggers. We all have things that just make us mad and just burn us up. So know your own triggers and have a team. If you have a child that you, as the adult, is having a really bad day, and you have a child who's having a really bad day, and then you get together, boom. I mean, that's how we end up on the news, right? I mean, truly, I've worked in situations to where the adult, perfectly wonderful person, good human being, had good strategies, bad day. Child also having bad day. And when you put them together, we burst into flames. So know that about yourself as a human and an adult, and have a plan for that. Everybody's going to have a bad day. Have a response. Maybe you have the ability to say, I need to take a 5-minute walk. Maybe that's not possible. I've been in classroom settings to where I was the only adult, or there was another adult, but it was a safety issue that we couldn't leave one person alone. So have a plan. For me, we had a set in stone plan. My kids had, some of them had a fidget toy. Some of them had, some of my kids would look up books, but we had a red folder system in my classroom. And so we called it the red folder, and in the red folder was work. It might be, and it depends on the level of your child and the age, right? For me, I taught an elementary age at that time, and I had a couple of students that had significantly explosive behavior, and they exploded, unfortunately, way more often than what I would like. So we implemented the red folder, and in the red folder was for all the rest of my classroom, because I still had, 10 other kids in my classroom that I could not. We'll talk about room clears later. Sometimes kids need to leave the room. And if that's an option, that's always wonderful. But sometimes kids can't leave the room. It's harder to make those other kids leave the room. So for me, we had a red folder system, and the red folder system was for my other students that were not involved in the meltdown. We had a kind of a separation panel, not a full one to close up the whole classroom, but we had an area in the back of the room to where the child who was having an explosive meltdown could be taken to, not a restraint or seclusion area, but just a separate area of the classroom that was kind of blocked by a few bookshelves. He would be back there, or she, and the rest of my kids would be in the front of the room as far away as we could get with some more strategically placed bookshelves, and they would get out their red folder. For some of them, it was a coloring sheet, because that was probably one of the few things that they could do independently and would do independently. For some of my kids, they had their red folder was a red topped bag of Ziploc bag, and it was Play-Doh, and they got out Play-Doh and they pounded Play-Doh. For some of my kids, it was academic work that was on their level. So I had a few kids that would practice spelling, a few kids that would practice other things. So it gave my other students at least some sort of academic pursuits so we could address and deal with the meltdown. And then it also gave me the ability that if I had enough help and enough assistance, that my non-tantruming, non-melting down students could be independent. I hopefully have one or two other staff in the room if I have somebody in that level of meltdown. And me as the teacher or the adult, whatever that looks like, is triggered, I can step back and take a breath and get my emotions back under control. Because I'm human and I have bad days too. And so I want to be able to, I need a system, right? I need a tag team, phone a friend, literally phone a friend. And that was the other thing, seriously, phone a friend. I was considered the structured unit, and there was a classroom teacher next door, and my unit was mostly for kids with autism or autism-like issues. There was our moderate and severe disabilities unit next door to us. And so that teacher I could call and he would send me somebody, or if he needed to call, I could send him somebody. So we had a phone a friend system. So, and some schools have restraint teams, if that's the case, and I don't know what your situation is like, but if you have a restraint team, then maybe that will give you the opportunity to step back and calm yourself down. And I do think it's something really important. And so why do we take this personally? It's cultural based, right? I grew up in Eastern Kentucky. I've lived here all of my life. I live on Cave Run Lake. Love it. But I was taught if you have difficult behavior, you punish and they get better. And as a kid, I think I got sent to the principal's office one time in my whole entire life because I was terrified. Principal was a super nice person. I never wanted to go there because I was so socially motivated to be a teacher pleaser. I wanted to make the teacher happy. I think I lost recess. I think I can remember like 3 times in my entire life of being made to go to timeout because I was really much wanted to socially please the adults in my life. A lot of the kids that we're seeing that come in, that's died somewhere along the way. That went away. And so it's changing. And I also don't like to have my authority questioned. I went to school for so many years. I am the teacher. I know all of these things, and we feel the pressure, right? We feel the pressure because I know that I'm supposed to be teaching math. I need to be teaching that alternate assessment. I need to be teaching lesson 14 and in language arts, whatever that is. We're feeling all of the other things that we need to be teaching as the teachers and the classroom teachers. And some kids know how to push your buttons. They just do. Kids learn what your triggers are. And kids sometimes will purposefully set you off as the adult. I had a student who liked to argue with people. He really liked to argue with people. He loved it. And if he could get you to verbally argue with him, it made his day. So just learning some of those things. And so we have to figure it out because we want to use effective methods and we don't want to escalate that chain of behavior if we can stop it early enough. So anyways, just some of Kim's random thoughts about why that happens. And usually I would say, talk to your peers around you. And I know where a lot of us are in Zoom settings, but I will say, ask somebody that you work with later. Why do you think that we respond personally to problem behavior? Like, why do you think that happens for the adults in the classroom? Because we absolutely get offended and get mad and hold a grudge against kids. And it is hard. I will tell you that it is hard to go back. I've had to go back when I have been significantly injured by kids and I had to go back and teach. It's hard to come back into the classroom when you've had that happen, and you have to be able to wipe the slate, be smart, be proactive, have strategies in place. But if I hold it against that kid forever, I'll never give them a chance to move on either. So that's just my thought on it. So 2 essential parts of this managing severe acting out behavior. So we have to understand the model, which we're going to talk about in detail in just a few minutes. And we have to develop strategies for each phase, which is something that you'll have to do on your own. And if you're going to walk teachers through this on your own later on, I usually, as we walk through it, I would ask the teachers to pick 1 or 2 students and write down. Let's walk you through the whole system of it, is the way that we would do this. So this is the escalation cycle. It's pretty similar if you've been through restraint training or been through some of those kinds of things. It's pretty similar. So you're going to go all the way from calm, the child is calm and happy, all the way through to recovery. And we're going to walk through each of these steps in just a few minutes. And we often think about peak. A lot of times when we think about behavior, the only thing that I ever get told, and I go on behavior calls all day long, I get 1,000 emails, and it's almost 99% of what I filter out is behavior issues. So everybody tells me about peak. I never hear about any of the rest of it. And those are the important parts. Those are the parts where we can actually make a difference. So good things to know. So whether the problem behavior is managed safely or not, or if you can diffuse it at all, it depends on your initial response, right? It's the things that we do first. And if we're watching for those kids' tells, it's those first few minutes that's critical. It is the critical time period that's going to make a huge difference in whether or not you can nip it in the bud, right? We can Barney Fife it out of there, or if you're going to spend however long it takes your child to go through that cycle. So we're going to talk about ABCs, and we talk about ABCs of behavior a lot. And I want to kind of point out they do kind of fall. Antecedent is that trigger, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And behavior usually falls right before peak. We're starting to see some of that big behavior. Yes, you get the school bus. Okay, so ABCs of behavior. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. Antecedent is all of the things that happen before the behavior occur. Behavior needs to be specific, right? So we need to give details. So a student that I worked with many years ago in my classroom, when she was 4, came to me, and her specific behavior was hitting and kicking with enough force to leave a mark, which was a bruise, right? So we started taking the data, and we started looking at what happened before, and we started looking at what happened after. So before, she hit when she wanted a cookie, she hit when she needed to go to the bathroom, and she didn't have a soft touch. She only had a knock down the door touch. She hit for everything. She did not have a communication system. And the consequences varied across the day. Sometimes we responded to it as communication. Sometimes we tried a lot of different things. And what we finally, our final data, so when we started counting, so she hit and kicked with enough force to leave a mark, which was a bruise 25 times a day was our average in the beginning. 25 times a day was where we started at. So we taught her to communicate, right? We gave her a way to ask for the things that she needed. And it slowly and gradually went away. For her, we went a lot of different routes. Other antecedent behavior consequences. Recently, I saw a kiddo in maybe middle school age, I think. And so he was going to PE with his peers, fairly functional kid. He had moderately good verbal skills, fairly functional, and he was going to gym. And some days he did just fine in PE class with all of his peers. And some days he was picking up a ball and chucking it at other students' heads as hard as he could and knocking them to the ground. And it seemed to be fairly random pattern. And so I said, I always ask for ABC data. If you have a kid who's having behavior enough that it's interfering with their ability to learn, or it's interfering with other people's ability to learn, then you should have some ABC data, right? This is where we have to start at. It doesn't have to be days. Years ago, they used to say, you've got to have at least 10 days. No, I tell people that you have to have enough data to tell me what the function of the behavior is. And we'll talk about what those are next, right? So that might be some kids, you can pick that up in an hour. Some kids, it might take a few days, right? This kid, we took a few days because you only go to PE class once a day. We took a few days of data, and what we found was that some days, on days that they played basketball, the PE teacher was asking them to run laps. This kid was not a runner, and he did not want to run laps. And so when he threw the ball and hit someone, or threw the ball close enough to hit someone, the PE teacher said, you're out, go sit in the bleachers. You know, you can't be in this class, you have to go to the bleachers. So the kid figured out how to get sent to the bleachers. When he got to the bleachers, he was really happy there. He loved sitting in the bleachers. And it was a really good gym teacher. Like, it wasn't, I don't know, the gym teacher was doing his best. He had a lot of kids in there. He really was a good guy. And he's like, I don't know what else to do. I'm sending him to the bleachers. Well, he figured out he didn't want to be in gym. he did not want to run those laps. And so he picked up the ball, he chucked it, and he got sent to the bleachers. It really worked for that kid. So I suggested, I said, okay, so let's change the environment. So we changed the environment by the gym teacher would push out the big crate of basketballs to the front which was sort of the kid knew that they were about to run laps when he saw that big thing of basketballs. And so I said, hey, would it be possible to leave it at the back of the room or just leave it in the locker until after they run these laps? And he's like, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. You know, the kids could bring it out. And I'm like, okay, let's try that. Let's leave the balls away so he doesn't have access. And then we changed the demand a little bit. This was a chunky kid. He was not excited to run. He probably had not spent a lot of time running. And so we asked him to walk 2 laps. We started out just walking 2 laps, and he walked them he got to pick a friend, which made him very popular because then that kid didn't have to run either. And then over a series of weeks, they built up to speed walking. They called it speed walking. They didn't call it running. They called it speed walking. And so then he would speed walk some laps with his friend. And so by the end, over a series of about a month, he was not quite running as fast as his peers, but he was mostly running. The balls were up. He wasn't chucking balls anymore because we changed the classroom, right? We changed what the gym looked like. We moved the balls away. And then we changed the demand a little bit, at least in the beginning. We moved it back to walking, which was something that the kid did do willingly. And we let him pick a friend because it's fun to work with a friend, right? And so ball chucking went away. And as far as I know, I feel like I need to knock on wood. As far as I know, the kid is not chucking balls at people and things are going reasonably well. Because sometimes we feed the behavior by accident, right? We don't mean to at all. That is not our goal, but we feed that behavior by accident because we've given the kid exactly what they wanted. So something to think about. And it's why it's so important to take that ABC data. You have so if you're here, you have in your little pocket folder, an ABC sheet. Whoops, hold on guys. I'm just clicking. I don't know which way I went. Okay, there we go. Let me set this down. You have an ABC data sheet, and it is also in the links, right? I think it's called ABC checklist, something like that. ABC data collection can just literally be a piece of paper to where you write ABC across the top and make some columns. It does not have to be fancy, but I found this one. It's free out there, and it has ABCs. So it has a place to put the antecedent, a place to put the behavior, a place to put the consequence, and it has some checkoffs. I think if you're working with teachers in the regular classroom, I think if you're working in a situation where you don't have time to script out, I don't have time to write a bunch of data, a checklist is very convenient. So this is a good place to start. If you have students who need this, it kind of looks like this. And I'll give you. You got one. Okay. I was gonna say I can give you one.
Chastity or Stephanie one is going to drop that link to that particular one in the chat as we go along.
Okay, perfect.
And if you have any questions, just make sure that you know you can just drop them in the chat, or you can just unmute and say those, and we'll share those out. So I want to make sure everybody had an opportunity to ask questions.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, please. And I don't mind questions whenever, so works for me. And we'll take a break probably around, do you think 10:30? Do you think something like that, 10:20? We'll take a break when I'm at a good point then, and we'll probably take 10 or 15 minutes to give people a chance, and then we'll come back. Okay, so this is something good, the ABC data sheet. And if you type in ABC data sheet into Google, 1,000 different ones will come up at least. There are a million different ones. Whatever works, right? There's no particular one that's great. I just like a checkoff sheet, especially if you're new to this and you're getting started. I think it's easy. I think it's a nice, easy place to start for kids. So why do we need to know this? We need to know that ABC data, the antecedent behavior consequence, because we need to know what's the function of that behavior. And this says everybody eats, and I say everybody eats meat. We have to add an M on there for medical. So escape is I'm trying to get out of here. Our little guy playing basketball, running laps. He did not want to run laps. And so he figured out how to escape that situation. So escape was his function of behavior, because if I know the function of behavior, then I know how to treat that behavior specifically. So attention, it could be positive or a negative attention. So attention seeking behavior is, I want all the attention. I want it. It can look like 1,000 different things. I had a little guy who was in young elementary age, and he came to school and he told a dirty joke, and all the kids in the room laughed. His dad said, "Oh yeah, I said that to his uncles and he heard." And the kid figured out that if he told this joke, kids laughed, right? So the function of his behavior was attention seeking. So we bought a knock knock joke book, right? We bought a knock knock joke book and taught the kid some age appropriate jokes, right? So he could get attention in an appropriate manner versus telling off color jokes, which is a bad place to be right now. So tangible is anything I can hold in my hand or anything you can get. So a tangible could be access to the iPad. It could be a sticker. It could be food items. A tangible, anything that I can hold in my hand. For some kids, it's toys. A lot of kids, it's technology now, right? Though anything that kids are seeking out. I had a student many years ago that would tantrum for access to a cabinet that contained the toys. We kept it locked because we were trying to get communication, right? We were trying to get him to use PECs and trying to get him to use a picture exchange communication system to ask for what he wanted versus the tantrum, which was where we ended up at. He did get down PECs. The other one is sensory. Sensory seeking behavior is hard, sometimes harder to break or harder to treat the function of, because I'm taking whatever that is with me. Sensory could be sensory seeking behavior. So it's kids who eat their shirt, right? I always knew with my personal child, I could tell if his day at school was really good or really bad based on how much of the top of his shirt was left. He would come home and he would literally, half of his shirt would be gone. He would eat it. So the more upset he got, the more he would gnaw on that shirt. It could be, I had a student who laid down on the floor and licked the legs of the chair. He liked that metal texture and he would lick the legs of the chair, and he was sensory seeking. It could be sensory avoiding. Kids who will not go into the big gym. Like if there's an assembly and there's 1,000 people cheering, that's too much for them, right? They can't handle that level of noise, not without some help or some modification. Sensory can look like a lot of different things. And it is harder. And it could be some kids get into, especially kids with autism, they get into different stimming, kids who tap on the table, kids who hum. It can be those kinds of things as well. And I always say meet or medical. We have to put in medical on there. Function of behavior definitely can be medical. And that's a harder one. And it's more delicate for school districts. And I will say, if you have a child, I don't know if there's teachers or anybody beyond administrators on here, but if you do have a student who you think has a medical issue, you should see your administrator, right? Because I know for school districts, if you say, hey, I think Johnny could be having seizures and he has to see a doctor, we can't necessarily do that, right? And it depends on your district. So you definitely, as a teacher, you should see an administrator if you think it's a child with a medical issue. I got called into a situation several years ago now, and it was a kid that I had seen before in the past, and they told me he was they called it non-compliant. He was exhibiting non-compliant behavior. So when they would ask him to do something, he would just push the work away, or sometimes he would be going to that next location and he would lay down on the floor. And he had done some of that in the past. And so when I went to the school to see him, I said, hey, when's the last time he had a physical? So they called up the poor guy. Of course, it's grandma raising him, right? Grandma is 89. This guy is in middle school. He's 6'2", 6'3", big guy. It's 89-year-old grandma raising him. How do you get him to the doctor? She said, and they're like, of course he's had a physical. You know, he had to have a physical when he moved to the new school. Well, yeah, that's true. But I know a lot of doctors that will just sign off just because it is hard. It's very hard sometimes for some of our kids to tolerate and sit through medical procedures. So grandma said, you know, we went to take him to get his physical this summer. And when we got to the parking lot, when he realized where we were, he attacked her in the car. So she ended up with a bloody nose And so she called the doctor's office and she said, well, the doctor came out to the car and saw him in the car. And she said, but he didn't really do anything beyond see that he was alive. And they were a lot more worried about grandma's nose, which they thought was broken. So I said, hey, would it be okay? The other piece that he had been really thirsty and he had been drinking a lot, which of course then means you need to go pee a lot. And so I said, hey, would it be okay if we asked the nurse to come down and look at him? I said, he is having some different behaviors, but I'm a little bit worried. I feel like we should clear some medical stuff before we do that. And so grandma gave permission for the school nurse to come down. Poor school nurse. I'm sure she hated me. For the school nurse to come down and gave permission for the school nurse to check his blood sugar. And so the school nurse came down. She quickly did a finger stick and checked his blood sugar with grandma's not written permission, but verbal permission over the phone. And when we checked his blood sugar, it was 1,000. It was 1,000, which is a medical emergency. Call 911. And so what we did find out, so they ended up calling grandma back and they rechecked it just to make sure maybe they hadn't got the finger clean and maybe it was some sugar on his finger or something like that. No, he had developed severe type 1 diabetes. And he was middle school age, and this was not at all expected for him. And so he spent a week in the ICU, and it looked like behavior. It had been going on for weeks. It had been going on for several weeks. And not that the school did anything wrong, but we don't always think about medical as a function or a problem of behavior. And I've had several situations to where here's my approach. I usually tell the family and I just say, hey, they've got these behaviors going on here, and I usually will list out exactly what the behaviors are. Here's what's happening. I can't say that this isn't a medical problem. How do you feel about taking them to a doctor? And I approach it from that method, especially when I was a classroom teacher. I never said, you have to take them to the doctor. You're not allowed, probably. I can't imagine that you're allowed to do that. I wasn't allowed, even though I really wanted to say, hey, you got to take this baby to the doctor. Something is bad wrong here. So I got called out for another situation, and it was an older student who was having headaches bad. Well, they didn't know he was having headaches, but he was late in the day in the afternoon. He started having, he started flipping tables, and it seemed to be when noises were happening in the room, right? When the classroom got noisy in the afternoon, he would be kind of shutting down and kind of curling up into himself, and he just did not appear to feel well. And it was really, really outside of the normal behavior for him, right? So if this is their normal behavior, something they've been doing for years, then it's probably not a medical issue. If this is a new behavior or something that has suddenly ramped up significantly, then it could be a medical issue. I don't know if that helps or not, if that makes sense, but that's my kind of rule of thumb. So this was something new for this student as well. So when we went in, we just said, hey, has he been to the doctor in a while? Has anyone checked? Well, no. And mom and dad refused to consider the doctor. And, he's fine. He's been fine for years. Well, that summer, he ended up at the doctor's office for an unrelated issue, and his shunt backed up. His shunt was backing up. And we think that's what it was all along. So it was about 6 weeks later that he ended up going to the doctor for an unrelated issue. And when they did an x-ray to check his head, his shunt was backing up, which will make you have a headache and make you feel bad and make you not feel well. And so we think that's probably, and when the shunt issue got fixed, the behavior went away. Same thing, I saw a preschooler who had been there he'd been there all the year before, and he did have behavior problems, but he had never been a biter. And so then he came back the next school year, and he was in class for about 5 weeks, and he started biting people. Has anyone ever had a toothache? If you've ever had a toothache and you bite down and give that deep pressure into your jaw, the pain stops, right? The pain goes away for a few minutes. And if I don't have good social skills and I hurt bad, and I figure out that if I bite you, the pain stops in my jaw, then I might bite people to stop the pain, especially if I don't have the skills to say I hurt, or, I don't feel really well, or, hey, my teeth really hurt. And so we called mom. And it's preschool, and you have to have a dental screening, right? You have to have a dental screening to go to preschool. And so we called mom, and she said, well, we did go to the dentist, and he sat in the chair, but he didn't open his mouth. And I said, okay. I said, he's biting. do you mind if the next time that he screams, he was a screamer. I said, do you mind if the next time that he screams, if I take a little flashlight and just take a quick peek in his mouth? I said, have you ever done that? Have you ever looked in his mouth before? You know, are you looking in his mouth occasionally? He can't say, my teeth hurt. Obviously, he's not going to the dentist on a regular basis. And she goes, you're going to look in his mouth? I said, well, if you tell me that I can, I will look in his mouth. And she goes, yeah, I don't mind. You go ahead and look, see what you see. Who knows? So kid screams, and we take a little flashlight and we look in his mouth, and he's got 3 or 4 totally rotted out jaw teeth. I mean, they're just gone, bad, jaggedy pieces left behind. And his gums are inflamed and they're bleeding. And so I don't know if you've ever tried to access dental care for kids with significant health issues or significant disabilities. It's hard. My personal child, we went to the dentist for years, and they tried to do the conscious sedation where you drink the purple Kool-Aid and you're supposed to be asleep, and then they're going to do the work. Well, you do that in the dental office. Well, we tried that, and it was like they gave him crack instead. And he went berserk and ran away from the dental office. We chased him through traffic in Winchester. The dentist chased him with us. The nurses are chasing him with us. We cannot catch him. The police are called. And we catch my kid. He's in a bush. We got locked out of our car somehow, which is running, of course. And we can't get back in our car. My kid is in a bush. The police have been called. We've just been on a chase all over the place. And all we tried to do was get my personal child's teeth fixed. They couldn't get it. They couldn't fix any of his teeth because he was too just wild to fix them. So the police come, and my child tells the police, they held me down. They made me take drugs, and they did bad things to me. We did every one of those things. So now I'm waiting to go to jail. So I get where parents are like, I can't take that kid to the dentist. So for us, we had to pay for sedation at the hospital. We had to pay to send him to the anesthesia floor and take him back to the day surgery and be completely put under anesthesia. If you go to the dentist in Winchester and they have a policy, they have a kid policy now, it's because of my child. It's completely because of my child running through traffic, no kidding. So I talked to the mom and I said, hey, he's got several rotted teeth. Going back to my preschooler, he does have several rotted teeth. They look really painful. They might be abscessed. This sounds like a pretty significant medical thing. Can we help you make a connection to a dentist that will do sedation? And even then, it's a 6-month wait, right? You're going to wait for a long time. And this was a mom that it was hard. She had a hard time traveling there, just getting access to a car to get there. So many needs, right? But medical is something, if you have a new behavior, if you have a sudden increase in behavior that you can't explain, then I think you have to consider medical, but you do have to do it delicately, right? So it's a good place to ask for help from an administrator if you're not one already. So pretty much talk through this slide. So what do we do with that information, right? So if we have our ABC data, our antecedent behavior consequence data, and we now know what the function of the behavior is, what do we do with that information? Well, we're looking for the patterns, right? A lot of times when people call me and they say, oh my gosh, this kid is melting down, we're having all these behavior issues. And I'm like, okay, when does it happen? It's all day. Everybody says that. It's all day. They do it all the time. And I'm like, really? All day, all the time? I'm like, okay, take the data. Let's take our ABC data. So when they start taking the data, well, maybe it's really in the mornings. They're melting down in the mornings. Maybe they're really melting down in the afternoons. Maybe it's only during these specific parts of the day. I'm looking for the pattern. Does it happen with the same adults all the time? Does it happen in the same setting? Maybe it's only happening when they go down to home ec, or maybe it's only happening in math class. But it feels like it's happening all day because once they start in that cycle, it lasts for hours. So we're looking at the patterns because those patterns are going to help us figure out how to fix that behavior. And they really are the key. And that's why it's so important to have that even a little bit. Yes. Okay.
Someone asked, how long would you suggest taking the day?
So my suggestion is, It depends on if you can get enough information quickly. Some kids, a couple of hours. If it's this is happening a lot, then maybe I'm only taking data just for a few hours. For some kids, if this is something that only happens once or twice a day and it's during specific parts of the day, then maybe I'm taking that data for a few days. There used to be a hard and fast rule. You have to have 10 days of data to do a functional behavior analysis, which is essentially what you're doing, right? When I do this with teachers, I tell them that we're doing this. I'm mostly doing this to inform practice, right? So I'm not necessarily doing a functional behavioral analysis. We're just doing parts of it. But I think it's up to the individual school district. I think it's probably based on that child and their needs and how quick you can figure out the function of behavior. And if you can see that patterns real quick, then you can be done in hours or a day or two, if that's enough. I hope that helps. That's a question I get asked a lot. And it's one of those questions that it depends on the child and the setting that they're in. So let's walk through these. I hate that I have to click on all of these. Okay. So strategies for responding to each phase of the acting out cycle. So we're going to break down and walk through each phase of that acting out cycle, which comes back to this escalation cycle. So we'll walk through each of these. And you should find, if you're here in person in your packet, there is another page that it'll say calm, trigger. I don't know what that one was called. Let me see. Find my list. Sorry, guys. It is called, I think it is called, so you have the escalation cycle link on there. And then I think on that one of the other pages is a whole list of strategies for each of those. So look for that in your packet. It should be in there. I'm pretty sure it is. I saw it earlier. So I know it's in the in-person packet, and I'm pretty sure it's in, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It's in the de-escalation part. So, and it's 2 pages. So you'll see the first page, just scroll down. It's there. It's there. It's the second part of this. Okay, perfect. And it's linked in the chat if you need it as well. So phase 1 is calm, right? So typically I tell people, think about what does calm look like for your student, right? What do they look like when they are calm? So calm hopefully means they're on task. They're doing the things that you need them to do. Maybe they're able to ignore distractions. They can accept corrective feedback. If I need to give them corrective feedback, this is the place, right? Corrective feedback is not a wrong thing to do at all, but I have to do it in the right time frame, right? So phase 1 is calm, and it's that very first box. This is also the place that if I'm going to teach an intervention, so if I'm using zones of regulation, if I'm using some sort of social skills program, social skills training for little kids, we thinkers, for bigger kids, I can see the dog on the book. Superflex. For bigger kids, Superflex is a good place to go, right? So if I'm teaching some sort of social skills intervention or something like that, this is the place in the day that I'm doing it. I will tell you, in my classroom, we had almost every classroom that I go in, they have a calm down corner. Have your kids go in the calm down corner and practice those skills, whatever it is you're asking them to do in the calm down corner. Have them do it when they are calm. In my classroom, we were set up, we were called the structured unit. We were set up on a pretty strict structure. Every one of my kids on their schedule, it said, visit the calm down corner. And they practiced those things when they were calm, right? So this is the time to teach those things because they're able to follow directions, right? They're able to follow those directions. And this is the time when their brain is going to be able to process that information. So this is the golden window, right? This is where you need kids to be. And hopefully if you're teaching academics, hopefully all of those things can take place in calm. So, and I think I probably pretty much said this. So this is the place, communicate your positive expectations. So just reminding kids, this is a great place to remind kids of the rules. Here's what we're doing. Here's the things that we need to do. This is a good place to do all of those things. I'm just trying to make sure I said all of this, and I think I did. Oh, if you expect kids to do it, If it's a routine in your classroom, if it's a rule, you have to teach it. And you may have to teach it over and over, right? If you didn't teach it, especially for kids with autism, how do we learn social skills, right? How do we learn a lot of those basic social skills, things that we need kids to know, like politeness in classroom, how to ask, how to raise my hand to get the teacher to notice me, how do I sharpen my pencil, how do I ask to go to the bathroom? If we don't teach it, kids won't know it. A lot of social skills we learn by watching others, right? I was raised in Eastern Kentucky. We eat off of paper plates, right? I grew up eating off of paper plates. There were 6 kids. We did not have formal meals. I went to a formal dinner with work and there were multiple forks and there were multiple silverware. I have no idea what to pick up. I don't know what to touch or not touch. What did I do? I watched the others around me, right? Because that's how we learn social skills, by watching others around us. That's a core deficit, imitation, right? Imitation is a core deficit for kids with autism. If you have kids with autism, if you did not teach it, they will not know it. Or they'll teach themselves and it might not be what you want. So we have to teach it.
That's a real quick question about.
Yes.
So let's say in a classroom, in a primary classroom, we have some kids that we've taught our classroom procedures and routines, but those kids are still not following classroom routines and procedures. Thinking about how to revisit, how does that look in our classroom? How, if we're supporting teachers, if we're thinking about teachers, how do we help them know to go back? When we tell them model, we tell them repeatedly practice this. Kind of what would you advise, for practice on those routines?
So practicing those common classroom routines. So I did have a classroom. I work with a classroom and it was a kindergarten classroom, it's like herding cats, right? Every kid is in a different direction. And she had a big classroom. I think she had 25 kids. And so the thing that she did was at the end of the school year, the previous year, she had some of her star students, not just kids with disabilities, but a mix of kids, walk through and model how to sharpen a pencil. How do I ask to get a drink of water? How do we line up in the hallway? All those common classroom routines. And she filmed them. So she filmed them on a school iPad with parent permission to film them. They were going to be, she called them her superstars. And so then the next school year, those same routines, she would, when the kids were coming in and it was bell work time, instead of playing cartoons, she would play the video modeling, right? She would play those video models for kids. And I know that takes a little bit of forethought. If you have a few kids, if it's an issue for just a few kids, maybe they're watching that instead of up on the smart board, maybe they're watching it on an iPad at the start of the classroom, start of the school day before school gets started. I will say, if you can give kids visual supports, words disappear. That's something that we'll talk about later. Words go away. Words go away. It's why you guys have all of these handouts, because later you'll only remember what research tells us. If you are a reasonably functional adult, you're going to remember 50% of what I say, if I'm lucky, right? You might remember 50%. If you're not a functional adult, right? If you're not having a good day, maybe you didn't sleep well last night, you might remember 20. Right? So think about it in the context of kids. Their brains are still growing. They're still learning how to do those things. You've said it 1,000 times, but they don't remember. They may not remember. So making sure that you have some sort of visual reminder. And I always tell teachers, regular classroom teachers, anytime there's a break in school, you have a 3-day weekend, that first day you come back, you need to say, hey, here's how we walk through this. And we'll talk about it later. It's called priming, right? I'm telling kids what I need them to do right when we're about to do it. We'll talk about how we would use that a little bit later. But I think those are good places to start. And having that set classroom routines is critical, right? Having that set classroom routine, set schedule to your day, it's critical for kids. Sometimes school is the only stable place in their life. The only place that they know, here's what's going to happen. And I know here are the things that I can expect to happen today. So it is really critical. And it's calming. If you think about it, if you have a different day and things don't go, like your schedule gets messed up. I'm flustered as an adult. When my schedule is out of whack, I feel so off all day. And I'm 43 years old, right? I'm 43. I've lived a long time. I've had a lot of times to practice being out of schedule, but it's still hard for me. It's still hard for me. And I feel like I'm mostly reasonably functional adult. So we'll talk more about that. That's a really good question. I do have at the end of this, towards the end, we'll talk about several strategies that will fall into that, telling exactly what classroom teachers should do. So phase 2 is triggers. And it's also our antecedent, right? If you're taking that ABC data, this trigger falls under your A, right? So something happens, there's conflict or failure, there's a change in demands, or the demands are too hard, or the demands are too easy. I worked with a kiddo that was in kindergarten. When he tested out, his full scale IQ was above 179. So think Albert Einstein. They were making him do kindergarten level work. He's bored to tears. And, for the teacher, in the fairness of the teacher, she just was trying to survive. She had, 20 something other kids and was trying to survive. So maybe the demands are too hard. Maybe they're too easy. Maybe there was a change in routine. Non-school-based triggers, and those are hard, right? Something happened before kids got to school. I've had kids come in and they were already triggered. It's 7 o'clock in the morning and they get off the bus at 7:10 and something happened at home. So if you have kids that you feel like are coming into school triggered, it's really helpful if you have a good connection with your family resource center. If you have, I know some school districts, I don't know, I'm assuming most people still have family resource centers. So access to your family resource center to support the home environment, right? Making sure that kids are getting their needs met. I've had kids that go home that I don't know that they're being fed when they get there, right? So they come in and they're starved to death. So non-school-based triggers, being able to address those. I have worked with my family resource center and with my school-based counselor to set up some family nights to talk about how to resolve conflict or how to deal with behavior for families. How do we address behavior in the home situation geared towards parents? So if that's something that you think is happening, maybe having not directly saying anything to that family, but maybe you're having a training and then really encouraging them to come. We always used to say, if you feed them, if you offer food, families will come, right? So you do a 20-minute talk on how to deal with behavior at home in an effective manner. So maybe your kids aren't coming in as triggered. And that's something that will take time. And non-school-based triggers are hard. They're outside of our realm of control. And I usually get asked, teachers will say, well, I can't do anything about it. He's coming in that way. I can't do anything. He's coming in that way. And I will say, at this point, they're just triggered, right? We can still intervene, and there's still things that we can do and put into place. When I have had kids that I know are going to come in upset, or they're going to come in and they are having a hard time at home, maybe it's just a loss. Their family has gone through a job loss, a loss of a family member, a house fire. I mean, I don't know. I try to prep that. My kids, when I was in the classroom, if I knew I had a kid who was frequently triggered when he got to school, then his first bit of time with me was calming activities. I didn't send him right into a regular classroom or send him right into something that was going to put a high amount of demands on him. I'm not saying I put him on TV or let him play on the iPad, but we went through calm down routines. So he came in and went through specific strategies to help him bring back down his level of upset before I expected him to do work, right? Because if he came in and Johnny comes in and he's crying or upset, and I say, all right, it's time for language arts, I'm just going to add fuel to the fire. And I know that's a delicate balance for those kids that are coming in like that all the time. I would just say, if you could plan that first half hour, first few minutes of their day, to make sure you give them some kind of calming activity to help with that. Thinking about what triggers do you see for the kids that you work with? I think that's really important. What are the triggers? Our tells. You're a poker player, figuring out what are those tells for those kids. Kinds of things are happening. I was in a classroom yesterday, and there was super good classroom, super good situation. A little guy who had gotten under a desk and was hiding, and he needed to get out. They got him out, and he had come back to his seat. Regular classroom. Large classroom, lots of kids. And so they got him to a seat. Well, you could see that he was triggered. And then his assistant reprimanded him in front of the classroom. And he went, boom. It blew him up. It just blew him up at that point. If she had been able to read his body language, he was punched in, he was beet red, he was just, his facial expression was mad. if she had been able to see that this isn't the time, you know, that corrective feedback is in calm. He's triggered. I can keep this for later, right? I can keep this information for later and tell him. I can say, hey, buddy, what are the rules? We don't get under the desk. That's the rules. And that's not wrong, but it was the wrong time. It was the wrong time, and it blew it up. And it went from a small problem to everybody had to leave the room. So triggers, this is when we're going to try to prevent. We're working on prevention and redirecting that student. That's our goal at this point. We don't want to add anything. We don't want to make it worse by any means. We want to give them the ability to be quickly successful. So if she had brought him back to the seat and given him something super easy to do that she could quickly give him a success, that would have been a plan. That would have been a good place. It might have been that he got back in his seat. He did do what she said. And if she had walked away and said, I love to another student, I love how your feet are on the floor, your hands are in your lap, and I can tell that you're ready to work. If she had responded to the other kids who were doing exactly what she asked them to do, so responding to other kids might have been a really good plan. Reinforcing that kid's the first on-task response when he sat in the seat, which was what she asked him to do. If she had said, great job, buddy, I like how you got in your seat. Instead, she immediately corrected him. She said, hey, we cannot be under these tables. And she didn't say it meanly. She didn't say it harshly. She was totally appropriate as staff. It was just the wrong moment. It just threw gasoline on the fire. Looking at that pattern of behavior. And this is the place where we're starting to look for that pattern of behavior. Look at formal programs and services. Maybe a lot of schools are doing a lot more. I'm seeing a lot of interest in social, emotional, school-wide curriculum. I think definitely if this is a special education student, we're looking at a kid with autism, we're looking at, we have to have some kind of social skills curriculum. It has to be taught. When I was a dumpster diver teacher, and there used to not be anything out there that was research-based, but there are several programs that are research-based and are evidence-based practices that show that they're effective for kids with disabilities. So very cool, super exciting for me to see things that have been years in the coming. So there are resources out there that we are putting in some kind of program for that kid, some kind of place where we're teaching them the appropriate social skills so that then their behavior can improve. So good places to start. Okay, so anticipating problem behavior and intervention beforehand. So starting out with those kinds of things. Also, pre-corrective statements should be provided prior to the student. So if I'm about to do kids something that I know they already have problems with in the past, I'm going to pre-correct them, right? They're in calm. So if I have a child that has a hard time going out to recess, he has a hard time lining up at the end of recess, then I need to think through what are my skills that as staff, so my kid is triggered, we're down here in prevention and redirection, so we're going to the playground. And I know this is a child who had problems in the past when they would blow the whistle and everyone needed to line up, they would run as fast as they could go. So my intervention for that child was prior to the adults blowing the whistle, an adult went up to that child and took their hand, took their hand before the whistle blew and started walking them towards the others, right? So they did not have the opportunity to elope. And so it cut that off. Because they like to be chased. They wanted to run. They wanted to run and they wanted someone to chase them. And you do chase. I mean, at that point, you're scared. You don't want kids running towards the road. So think about, for our triggers, think about how can we fix those triggers before they happen. So if I know, once I know my pattern of behavior, if I know that kid's going to run every time we blow the whistle and that's when the problem happens, then I'm making an intervention there. I fix it before I let it happen. I'm trying to think of some other things that we've done. For some reason, I keep coming back to runners, but my personal child, he loved to play soccer. And in soccer, you don't touch your opponents. Your job is not to touch other people. And so he apparently, he could not distinguish between soccer and football. And so he would be running down the field. He was in second grade. He would be running down the field and he would grab people by the shirt and fling them down. This was not a popular thing to do. He played soccer out with all the other kids. It was the city league. This was not good. And it wasn't something that I could let him do. So I had to figure out a pre-correction. So I taught him to keep his hands in his pocket when he was in second grade and he played soccer, that I taught him to keep his hands on his, at first it started out in his pockets because he needed the physical pressure as kind of a reminder that, you know, hands are down, we're not touching people. And then over time, as he got a little older, it moved to, he kept his hands on his hips, right? And that was how we stopped body slamming on the soccer field. And it pre-corrected it. Once he slammed somebody down, it's too late. I can't fix it at that point, but I could teach him before. And I knew the pattern of behavior. I knew when he got out there and he got so excited, he's running down that field, somebody got in the way from him, boom, they're done. I can't fix it once they're down on the ground, but I could fix it before. And so I taught him a skill. I taught him to keep his hands in his pocket, along with a lot of conversations when he was calm. Remember, and right before we got, remember, we don't touch the other players, right? We're not touching other people. This is soccer. Soccer means I don't touch people. I keep my hands to myself. So a lot of pre-corrective statements. For later, when we talk about priming, I use this with some of my students. We would go out to the playground and I'll tell you that story in a bit. I won't tell you now because I like to tell it later. The other thing is we have to think about how are we teaching kids self-regulation skills? Where in the day, and that comes back to our social and emotional skills. Self-regulation takes a long time, right? Self-regulation is the ability to be upset and to be socially appropriate, right? Self-regulation comes back to, I have a lot of different things that happen in the day. And so I've learned skills over the course of years, right? Usually we start developing self-regulation skills preschool age, right? But maybe before preschool age. So it starts happening and it takes a series of years to get good self-regulation skills. I always tell people, think about adults in your life that you know that are not able to be angry and stay socially appropriate. I always think about family reunions. Cousin Bob is, he gets mad and everyone knows it. And he has a hard time being socially appropriate. So self-regulation skills is one of those things. It's a life skill, right? We're teaching kids, if we're teaching kids self-regulation and we're teaching kids those social skills, we're teaching them a life skill that's going to go with them throughout their whole life. And it'll affect, are they able to have a job? Are they able to function in society? So these do, they're not academic necessarily, right? I'm not teaching math, I'm not teaching English, but I'm teaching them all the things that they need to get to the point of math and English. So things to try before continued escalation, say the student's name. So if I'm having to get it up, Johnny, I need you to sit in your seat. Say their name. Use a nonverbal signal. This was something that I did with my kid on the soccer field. The other thing that I did was this. People thought I had it before jazzy hands. Before the age of jazzy hands, I would be that crazy soccer mom on the side of the field going, Jacob, Jacob. Wave my fingers and put my hands on my hips. It's a prompt. Nobody else knew. The other parents just thought I had a funny way of cheering my kid on. It could be something private. I really like nonverbal signals. I really do think those are a great strategy. If you're in the classroom and you have a kid, I had a student that we worked with many years ago, and she would slam against her chair. She was out in the regular classroom, and as she began to get more upset, she would slam her back against her chair, flicking her chair up. And so what we would do was we worked out a signal, and I don't even think that she realized that she was doing it. It was just this ingrained habit, the thing that she did when she was upset. So we worked on teaching her what she could do when she was upset, right? So teaching her the things that she could do when she was upset. And then we also worked out a secret signal. So we would tap on her desk. So we would just come by, tap on her desk, and keep on walking, right? I don't need to make a big deal. I don't need to let other kids know that that's what's happening. Private signals are really nice. Visual supports are a huge thing. Words disappear. So visual supports are great. And that's something that we'll talk about. I know in your folder online, and I know in your folder here, there are it's not exactly this one, but these are prompting cards. Oh, these are prompting cards. And so you guys have a set, and there's a link to those in your handout. These are great if we are going to visual support and I need to give directions. So this one says quiet. There's walk with class, first then. This one is critical right now. Yours say, I can't remember what all yours say. Let me see if I can find. There's a lot of different versions of these. Aha, here they are. Yours look like this. So yours say, sit in the chair, sit on the floor, look, wait. Yours say, stop, help, quiet. Just a visual word. So I tell adults that are working with kids who need prompts, maybe these aren't the right words that you're having to say over and over. Whatever words you're having to say over and over, make a visual card, right? Make a visual card, keep them on a book ring or a clip of some kind. Well, you guys, my book ring is dying. Keep them on a book ring or a clip of some kind. These are nice. The ones that you guys have are pocket size, right? You might wear them on a lanyard, and then I'm able to flip to this, and it's a visual prompt that I can use with that kid when they're upset. And we'll talk about why that's important. And part of that is as kids get upset, higher functioning parts of the brain kind of shut down. And that's something that we'll look at in a bit. But proximity and praise, move closer, right? Move closer to them, give them praise, find something that you can praise them for. Maybe it's you know what? I like the color of your shirt. I love that blue in your shirt. Some sort of a happy response. Maybe it's hey, I like how you got your name on your paper today. Good job. Relaxation techniques. I think if you have a kid who is frequently going through the escalation cycle, then social skills, you have to going back to some sort of social skills curriculum and going to some sort of relaxation techniques. I know KVEC did a book study on zones of regulation last year. And one of the things that I love about zones of regulation is that it gives you techniques, right? If you actually do the lessons. So hopefully some of your school districts got to participate in that. Dig out those books, right? Dig out those books and look at those relaxation techniques. They take 5 minutes. They're taking 5 minutes, and it's something that you're teaching kids in calm, right? So that when they are starting to get upset and they are reaching escalation, they're escalating through the cycle, then you have something to fall back on besides punishment. You have something that you can do. So maybe, you know what, it's time to do our star breathing. I can tell, and it depends on the child. For some kids, I might say, I can tell that you're getting upset. We'll stop. I'll do this slide and we'll stop. I can tell that you're getting upset. I can tell that that you might need to do the star breathing. For other kids, I might not say that. If I said, I can tell you're getting upset, might be the words that escalate the cycle. For other kids, I might just quickly change their schedule and put star breathing on the schedule or put calm corner. So this one is important. Give more start requests than stop. So sit in the seat versus get off of the floor. So more start requests, things you want them to do versus things you want them to stop doing. That's something that's critical. Giving them something positive that you can do. The teacher did do a good job yesterday. She said, I need you to sit in your seat. So instead of saying, get out of the floor, she said, I need you to sit in your seat. It got her the same desired response, but it was easier. The student was more likely to comply with that versus stop. So phase 3 of your escalation cycle falls right here in the middle if you have the paper and you're following along. It's the third category over, and it is called agitation. We've made it to agitation. And the component of that on the bottom is reduce anxiety. So the bottom of that is for staff and adult responses, and the top of that is for student, things that the student either does or things that you want the student to do. So phase 3, agitation. So usually in agitation, the things that we're seeing is behavior becomes more unfocused. Their kids are more distracted. You're seeing successive cycles of just continued breakdown of behavior, basically. So kids might be off task. You might see kids that are bothering others. It could be social withdrawal, kids that are just shutting down at this point and withdrawing from whatever it is going on around them. It might be questioning and arguing. I had a student who loved to argue with people. And so it could be that they are asking why, what are we doing? Why do I need to do this? Agitation can look like 1,000 different things. So typically I would say, think about your specific student or a student that you know, what does agitation look like for them? And I think that's critical to know. If you're doing this if you walk through this with your staff, having them pick out a student in their setting, it'll help. It helps to make it more real if they have that specific student to walk through. So other things that you might see is if we are intervening here, and we are, the goal is to reduce anxiety. Kids with autism and kids with a lot of other issues have a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of different factors and causes for that. Anxiety is its own disability, right? Anxiety can absolutely be debilitating. But the goal of intervention and agitation is how do we reduce their anxiety? And we need to implement that before we get to this point, right? So once you've gone through the cycle and you've thought about this for the student, you're thinking about how are we putting into place some sort of either social skills training, zones of regulation, and there are other options out there. It could be the incredible 5-point scale. There's a lot of different directions that you could go, but what can you do to help this child deal with their anxiety? For young kids, there's a book called When My Worries Get Too Big, if you work in elementary age. I really like that book. It talks about anxiety, and it talks about it in a very kid-friendly manner and helps you walk through what that would look like for them. You want to use empathy. You don't have to say that you agree with the behavior, and I wouldn't want you to say that, but you might say, I can tell you're feeling upset, or I can see that you're angry, whatever that looks like for them. Maybe they're saying, I had a student that he wanted to get an extra serving of pizza at lunch, and a bunch of kids did get an extra serving of pizza. And by the time he got up there, unfortunately, they were out. And he started escalating behavior. And he kept going, I didn't get pizza. I didn't get pizza. I didn't get any more pizza. I wanted pizza. And so we used empathy. And I said, you know what? That really stinks. I'm so sorry that you didn't get more pizza. Why don't we see, are you still hungry? Let's come back to the classroom and let me find you something else to eat. What else can I do? I can't make more pizza up here. It's all gone, unfortunately. But so we used empathy. And for that kid, it totally alleviated. If I had come in and said, oh, the pizza's gone, sorry about your luck, and went on with my day, I think he would have left angry. And I think we would have ended up in a meltdown situation for him. So just thinking about how do we use empathy, provide reasonable options and choices. Pizza's not a choice anymore, right? Pizza's not a choice, but maybe you can get a chocolate milk out of the refrigerator in the classroom. And then there's an option of, I don't know about you all, but I always have food in my classroom. There was always a snack, whatever those options are. Maybe you're giving them 1 or 2 choices, 3 choices, whatever is appropriate for that child and for your setting. And then help them engage in success. Maybe if you can tell that they're in agitation, I'm not placing them. If I know a student is already upset, I'm not placing difficult task demands on them. I'm going to fall back on something that I know they'll be successful with, because I need them to have some success so that we don't continue to amp up the behavior. So just thinking through that and knowing that that's an option. It's important to know what can they be successful at academically. If I need to push them back towards academics, fine. What can they be successful at? Maybe pushing them towards, maybe I was planning on doing work with high schoolers sometimes. Maybe I was planning on doing an activity with high schoolers and we were going to learn some of the parts of algebra. Maybe I hold that lesson for a few minutes, right? Maybe I hold that for a little bit and we go back and we do something else so that I bring that child back down to a level to where then he can benefit from the academic lesson. So just thinking through that and having the ability to do that. So defusing off-task behavior. Off-task behavior is something that I get asked about a lot. Kids are not doing what we need them to do. So assess the situation and figure out, is this a can't do? They're off task because they cannot do the work, or they're off task because they won't do the work. Figure out which one it is. Or is this so if it's an emergency situation, so as in they're in a crisis, they're flinging chairs, something drastic is happening and it's an emergency, then hopefully you have some sort of crisis plan in place, right? And a crisis plan just means when Johnny does X, Y, Z, then this is how the staff will respond. So it's lining out what do we do if Johnny is throwing chairs? What's our response? But if that's not what's happening, then these are the off-task diffusing steps, right? So if you have a student who's off task and it's not an emergency, then you're going to maintain your flow of instruction. So you're just ignoring them, right? You're going on with instruction and ignoring them. You're going to recognize the kids in your classroom who are on task, and you're not giving any response to the child who's off task. I'm ignoring them completely. I'm redirecting. I'm going to ignore it. I'm redirecting. I am focusing on the task. I'm using short language. I might use gestures. I am maybe prompting that student to ask for help. If I think they're off task because they need help, then I'm reminding them, this is how I can get help. And I'm praising compliance. Was in a kindergarten classroom yesterday, and it's been a really crazy week. And I was in a kindergarten classroom yesterday, and the teacher did a really good job. She had a child who was totally off task, and she had a lot of kids who were on task, and she did a really nice job of totally ignoring the student he got up and he laid down on the floor. He got up and he laid down on the floor, and she just started praising the kids. I like how your feet are on the floor. I like how you're in your seat. I love how you're holding your pencil. She started going around and giving compliments to all of the kids who were on task, and she kept on with the flow of instruction. And after a few, probably about a minute, when she totally ignored that child, he got up and he got back in his seat. And when he got up and he got back in his seat, she came by and she said, I love how you're sitting in your seat. And then she went on, and she just, for the most part, ignored it because it was behavior. We have to pick and choose our battles, right? Sometimes with kids, everything becomes a battle. Everything can become a battle, and we'll lose, right? We will lose if we make everything a battle, and because we don't want to make it a hostile situation. So pick and choose your battles. In this circumstance, it wasn't what the teacher wanted. She did not want the child to lay on the floor, but her best response was to totally ignore him, continue teaching all the rest of the kids while giving lots of praise for doing the correct for the kids who were on task. And then when he did comply and he was willing to do what he needed to do, then she said, I love how you're sitting in the seat. And she never once said, get out of the floor. I totally get why you want to do that, because it was inconvenient. The other kids are watching, but he completely complied. And so it became a 90-second problem versus something that I think if she had gone up to him and tried to stop everything and say, get out of the floor, get out of the floor, it would have become an argument and he wouldn't have moved based on his past, behaviors. He would have laid in that floor until Christmas break. So other things on addressing disruptive behavior: recognize and respond quickly to students in agitation, and then redirect. So clearly state the expected behavior. The other thing that the teacher said, everyone should be sitting in their seat, and we're working on, I think they were working on reading. We're working on our reading sheet right now. Communicate concerns if you have them. Present options. If there are options that are available. I worked with a student who was, he was identified as autistic. He was identified as oppositional defiant disorder. And then he had a couple identified as having anxiety. He had multiple labels, but the ones that affected us the most were oppositional defiant disorder and the autism. So for him, we presented options. So he had a chair on the right side of the classroom and a chair on the left side of the classroom. He had 2 desks because it didn't matter what desk he sat at. It only mattered that he sat at a desk. All right, are you sitting in the left desk or the right desk? Great. Are you going to write with the purple pencil or the yellow pencil? Great. So it gave him his options. that were adult controlled. And we'll talk more about that later. So present options, allow space. The teacher did a really good job with the kindergartner in the floor of just going around him and staying out of his, not engaging with him being in the floor. Attend to other students and prepare for the worst. If you have a student that you know that this is a previous cycle, that you have seen that this is going to continue to go downhill, prepare for the worst. And you need to have a plan for the worst, right? Going back to your crisis cycle plan. And those, it depends on your school district, right? It depends on what your school district policies are. My crisis plans were usually like a one-page sheet, and it just said something along the line. It just gave the steps. At this point, you know, when Johnny engages in throwing the desk, then I will call the restraint team down. Then, you know, it just gave those basic steps of what I needed to do. People get worked up and they're kind of nerve-wracking to write, but really it just needs to tell the staff what they need to do when whatever the behavior is happens, and gives them that fallback plan. So acknowledge compliance and a neutral manner, right? An institute standard consequence. So they put a consequence here in agitation. I'm going to tell you, I like natural consequences, right? So the natural consequence is if you didn't get your work done and everybody's moving on to centers, maybe the child needs to finish that. It depends on the student and situation. Sometimes I do like natural consequences. I will tell you that, because sometimes there are consequences for the things that we do. But I think you have to know your student and know the situation on whether or not you implement those at that time. So I'm going to say, watch this later. If I play it now, will it show up? Okay, so we're going to watch this now. So this is called the reptile brain. And so when a student is in agitation, we move away from using lots of words and placing lots of demands, because the higher functioning parts of our brain shut down. So we're going to watch just, I think, about 1 or 2 minutes of it. We won't watch the whole video. Feel free to go back later and watch that whole thing if you want, but it kind of walks through what reptile brain is and what happens. It's fight, flight, or freeze mode. And I'm going to try to do this, so bear with me if I mess it up, guys. Reptile brain comes back to fight, flight, or freeze mode. What we know is for anyone, all humans, as they begin to get upset, and begin to go through the process of the escalation cycle, the higher functioning parts of your brain shut down. So my ability to think, my ability to say why I did what I did, my ability to be reasoned with go down. The more upset I am, the less ability that I have to think and reason like a rational human being, right? So this means in the classroom, we see kids who fight, so I'm going to attack you. Or we see kids who flight, I'm going to run away from the situation because I can't be here anymore. This is so intolerable to me that I'm terrified and I'm running away. Or I freeze up. I'm just going to totally shut down. I'm not going to talk. I'm here physically present, but emotionally and brain-wise, I have shut off from everything. So fight, flight, or freeze mode is something that teachers need to know about, because it affects our practice, right? When we have kids who are really upset, then we have to fall back on visual supports, visual cues, and just backing away and giving kids a minute to kind of bring themselves back together. And hopefully we've taught them some skills when they are in calm that they can fall back on during this time. This is a good place to where they need to know those zones of regulation. So they can say, you know what, I am in the red zone. I'm about to be in the red zone. What can I do right now to help myself calm down? So important things to know. Okay, phase 4, acceleration. So overall behavior is staff engaging. So the child may be trying to interact with the staff at this point. They may be saying things. This is the point where teachers are like, they just pushed my buttons, because kids are amping up. And it looks like a lot of different things based on the child. But the interaction is negative, right? It's not continuing this verbal conversation with that child at that point is not going to help anything. So this is a good time to stop step back. So the child might be questioning what's going on. They might be arguing. They might make threats. This is where they say, I had a little guy tell me, I'm going to go home. I'm going to get my grandpa and he's going to kick your beep. I mean, he was really upset. It was a really bad day and his grandpa might have, but he was mad, right? I didn't laugh or joke. I just totally said, I'm sorry that you feel that way. And I just walked away at that point. I just backed up and let him be upset and be mad. He was still at his desk. He was still sort of compliant. And I knew at that point that any more interaction with me, he was only going to tank. He was very upset and he was going to say some things that would put me in the position to where I would have to respond because of the other kids. So I simply walked away. It was time for me to go. We're going to see non-compliance, and this is when they're going to try to provoke others. So those are the things that we might see in acceleration, which is stage 4, right? Acceleration is in stage 4. The nice thing to know, or the worst thing to know, is acceleration is the last point that we have before a student hits peak. And we'll talk about peak after this, but peak means I can't intervene. The child's in a full-blown meltdown. So acceleration it could look like other signs, might be verbal abuse of the staff. It might be things like escape and avoidance. This is where they're trying to get out of stuff. Maybe they're destroying your property on a low level. Maybe they're not totally tearing up the classroom yet, but they've started. A lot of times I see kids break pencils and breaking crowns defiantly, breaking some of the small items in the classroom, but they're not yet tearing up the classroom totally, where they're flipping the desk and things. Thinking about what does this look like for your student or you're in your classroom situation is something important to think about. Keys to address non-compliance and defiance. So teach the student what to do. So we have to teach those classroom routines. We have to teach those classroom rules, and we have to review them, right? Those are things that we're going to have to go back. If there's a break in learning, like break in in-person learning, if you have to go out, some schools, if you shut down for COVID and you're out for a few days and then you come back, or maybe it's a fall break. I was in a district that was off a couple of days earlier this week. They had a staff day. Coming back after even a few days break, you have to review those set rules for your classroom and the routines and procedures. And for some students that have challenges in following those, I'm going to review those every day. Doesn't take very long, and I might do it privately with them. Maybe they have an assistant. It might be a part of our morning, one of the first things that we do in the morning. I don't know. I had kids that we did a file folder task. And part of that task was putting the rule, we did file folder task with classroom rules, because it gave a way for me. I could put that in their independent work. We could quickly review it, and it gave me a way to remind.
That's one of the things I was going to ask. How do we help support teachers with those routines and procedures? And so I was thinking about, we were talking about giving a visual clue. So say maybe most of the procedures you've been off on a fall break, Thanksgiving holiday, and you review those procedures. And you may have to do that 2 or 3 days in a row.
Yes.
You may have to do that multiple times throughout that day when you come back. But then for those kids that need that extension, how do you might use a visual support or a lanyard? Do you have that on your lanyard?
Yes.
Some ideas about how to help.
I have a really nice visual support of when I'm at my desk, I'm working, I'm quiet. There's a third one. I can't remember what the third thing is, but maybe they have maybe they have a very small set of rules right on their desk, whichever ones that they're struggling with. Maybe there's something right on their desk that you can say, hey, remember, we're quiet at our desk, or we're whatever. So you can touch that visual reminder. Oh yeah, remember it's center time. Here are the rules for center. Here's what we're going to do right now in this moment. I have had a classroom teacher that they did popcorn. They did a popcorn every day for the first minute of class. She would let different kids popcorn up and say, so she would say, all right, how do we sharpen our pencil? A kid would popcorn up and model for the class, right? She did it with her whole class every day. She took about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, but she said that it made a big difference in her whole day. of just reminding all of the kids. It was probably overkill for a lot of the kids. They didn't need that anymore, but there was a group of kids in her classroom, 4 or 5 kids that needed that reminder every day of what the rules are. So definitely coming back to that, having some kind of visual. For my kids with more significant disabilities, they had like a 3-ring binder system, and there was a little reminder of the rules. And so it was Velcroed. So they would pick the Velcro up and they would Velcro it on every day. And it gave the classroom aide who was working with them a chance to say, remember, we keep our hands to ourselves, our feet on the floor. It gave them just a quick chance. And then it was there during the day if they needed to go back to it. Speak to the student quietly rather in the group. I think that is really important. Yesterday, one of the things that I saw, the kid, things escalated when he was reprimanded in front of the class versus if they had just had a quiet moment, the rest of the class was going to leave in 5 minutes. If she had just said, hey, can you stay, stay right here for a minute while everybody else lined up to go wash their hands, she could have taken a quiet minute and said, hey, here's exactly what I needed you to do. And handle that discreetly instead of in front of the class. And I think the timing of it would have made a huge difference for that kid. Going back to that, acknowledging kids who are on task and complying, provide a single specific direction. So saying sit with a gesture and you're pointing to the chair where you want them to sit at versus I need you to sit in my seat. I need you to sit in your seat and show me you're ready to work. That's a lot of words for a kid whose brain's shutting down. So I'm going to sit, sit, sit. Maybe I only say it once and then I just keep gesturing. And I'm going to hold that demand. And I don't have to say a lot of things. If that's something that I really need them to do right now, I need them to be in their chair, then I'm just going to say sit. And then I'm going to hold the demand. That's a situational decision. Some kids you might be better off ignoring. I don't know. And some of it is playing around with it. And I hate to say playing, but it's trying out different things and figuring out what works. And then using the sheet, right, to record the things that did work, the things that were successful. So you know to go back to those. Is a really critical place to start. So other things for acceleration. This is our last opportunity to avoid peak behavior, right? This is like kind of our top of, we're almost at the top of our roller coaster ride. Remove. Our other thing at this point is we're going to focus on safety. If we're accelerating and the child is still spinning out of control, then my job is to focus on safety. And I'm going to avoid all escalating prompts. I'm going to maintain calmness. If I can't be calm as the adult in the situation, I will not help the situation be calm, right? If I can't have my own sense of calm, and that's really hard, and it does take practice to get there, but you have to be calm in order to help a child be calm. Approach the student in a non-threatening manner and utilize non-confrontational limit setting procedures, right? So I don't want to confront them. I don't want to be in their face, but maybe I'm saying sit. I'm pointing at the chair. Then maybe I walk away for a minute or two to give them an opportunity to comply, knowing that the higher functioning parts of their brain have shut down. So I think that's a great place to start. So techniques that backfire, things that do you in acceleration, holding a grudge. I watched a staff member say, you do this all the time. I've seen you do this every week. I don't know why you act this way, but she was upset, right? And I get why she was upset. It was a hard situation. She was upset and she was holding a grudge. So raising your voice and yelling, nagging, drawing unrelated persons into the conflict. I had an assistant that I worked with years ago that if the child was in the hallway and he would lick his hand and then touch things, which is not sanitary and is a little gross, but we were working on it really hard, but she would drag unrelated people into it. We'd be walking down the hallway and she'd go, did you see him doing that? Do you see what he's doing? To random people as we came down the hallway. And it took me a while to convince her that he was attention seeking and she was giving him all kinds of attention. And he knew that if she was with her and he licked things and touched things, she was gonna make a big deal out of it instead of just ignoring it or just doing the other things that we were doing. Using sarcasm. especially if you are working with a student with autism. They're not going to understand sarcasm necessarily. Any of that non-literal language, they're not going to understand. Making assumptions, bringing up unrelated events, making comparisons to other siblings, brother or sister. I had a teacher a few weeks ago go, you know what? His brother never acted like this. I had his brother too, and he never did this, right in front of the kid. And I'm like, oh. And you could just see the kid. He was like, well, too bad. And I think the kid ended up saying, well, you ain't got my brother now, was his response. And I'm just like, all right, you don't, unfortunately. If we move past peak, or if we move to peak, if we have tried multiple things and we haven't been able to successfully stop the cycle of behavior, then we're going to hit peak. Peak is overall behavior is out of control. My only goal in peak is safety. I can't teach anything there, and there's very little research. Once a child hits the full-blown meltdown, and insert whatever behaviors you want into that. Once they hit full-blown meltdown, the only thing that I can do during that is keep the child safe. Maybe I can keep my property safe. You know, hopefully they're not, if I have a laptop out or I've got iPads out and I can tell we're in acceleration and I can tell this kid is going to keep on going. Maybe I'm putting those things away. I'm moving any of those things. I had a student who would stab people with pencils. And so if she hit, our policy for her was if she hit agitation, once we knew she was at the point of agitation, all hard objects went away because she would try to stab you with them. So pencils went away, pens went away, and she would be offered a crayon or a marker, right? That's the only thing that she could have at that point because of safety concerns. Self-injury, some kids will hurt themselves. Running, screaming, we've all seen peak is my guess. We've all seen peak a lot. Peak can look like a lot of different things for our kids. So just knowing that's what it looks like. And that's just exactly what we said. So just focusing on safety. Hopefully you have some sort of crisis management. Here's what I tell people. If I'm not going to worry about this necessarily, if this is a one-time thing, or this is really bizarre, the child does it 1 or 2 times a year, then I'm probably not worried enough to be doing all of this. If this is a frequent behavior, this is happening every week, more than once a week, every day, more than once a day, then I'm going to implement something. I need to be implementing something. If we're at the point to where it's interfering with the student's ability to learn or other children's ability to learn, then I have to implement something. But in peak, my only concern is safety. I'm trying to keep everyone safe, staff safe, students safe, whatever that looks like. So responses to avoid agitated behavior from the staff. I had a staff member who screamed. When a child would get upset, she'd scream like she was dying. So I knew I had to send my staff member out because she couldn't handle the kid when he was at that point, and she made it worse. So a part of our behavior plan was she had to go. And I always made it her job to take the other kids out if that was something that was going to be done. Moving into the student space, you don't want to corner the student. You're trying to, so my suggestion is if you're in peak, I'm going to stay back if I'm able, if they're not running away, if they're not hurting themselves or others, right? If I'm not needing to restrain them. And if you're restraining, hopefully you are all legal certified, all of those kinds of good things, right? If my job at peak is I'm not looking directly at the student, I'm not making eye contact. It depends on the child. Some kids I might slightly turn away from them. I'm still watching them, but I'm watching them discreetly. I'm not arguing with them. I'm not engaging in a verbal argument. Sometimes kids are saying things to you and they're trying to get you to engage with them, and it's just going to keep on, it'll prolong it, right? So my job at that point is I'm trying to shut the situation down. And a lot of times the best way that I can do that is being quiet as I can, emanating calm. For a lot of kids, when they get to that point of escalation and they're that upset, they don't know what to do either. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to get back to the point to where that's not happening. And it's scary for them. So my job is to bring as much calm to that situation as I can. Some of my kids, I would turn down my lights or turn off my lights. I'm lowering stimulation as much as possible. And it depends on the student and the classroom situation, but I'm lowering stimulation. I'm trying to, if we're at peak and I'm able to clear the room, then I'm probably removing my other students if that's possible, or I'm moving that student to an area to where not everybody else can see what's going on, just for the dignity and the sake of that child. Because I want them to have friends and I want the other kids to be around them and need them to be able to be with them for social skills. And they have enough challenges beyond letting other kids see that, if you're able. And I know sometimes you're just not. I'm not going to communicate an urgency to gain control. I don't want kids to think that I'm upset, and I don't want them to think that I don't know what's going to happen. Even if I don't know what's going to happen, I'm going to fake it at this point, right? Even if I don't know what's going to happen, I'm totally faking it at this point. And I'm completely acting like, I'm not acting like everything's okay, but I'm acting like everything will be okay. We're going to get through this. This is going to be okay. And if I'm saying anything to the child, I'm using empathy, right? I'm saying, I'm sorry that you feel that way. I'm sorry that you're having a bad day. And I'm probably not saying a lot of that. My best bet is to totally let the child, at this point, I'm just going to let him melt down. I can't stop it. It's pretty much too late at this point. So what can I do instead? I'm going to speak calmly. I'm minimizing my body language. This is the point to where I need to control my face. If the kid is busting up the classroom and that's not something that I can restrain them to stop that from happening, I'm giving it as little attention as possible, because the more attention that I give, I may make it worse by accident. I'm being brief. If I can, I want to get on an eye level position. I'm remembering the safety of my staff. I'm remembering the safety of that child, and I'm remembering the safety of all the other students who might be present. I'm giving them as much space as possible, right? This is not really the time to talk to them. This is the time just to stop. At this point, words won't fix this at this point. So de-escalation. The meltdowns happened. We're at the point of meltdown. So kids are sometimes confused. If you've ever had to go through restraint training, or if you've ever had to restrain a child, we know kids are tired. They're crying at this point. They're probably exhausted. You're exhausted. Staff is exhausted. It's just really tough. Sometimes they'll withdraw. Kids might go to sleep. Denial. I had a student who would always say, I did not have a fit. I did not do that. The classroom would be busted to bits, and he'd be like, I don't know who threw that down. It was not me. Total denial of what was happening. And I wouldn't be saying who did this. Like, I'm not saying anything, but he would just be like, I don't know what happened in here, man. It's a mess. You should clean this up. Just total denial. And I had to stop myself from responding to that, because I wanted to be like, you did this. You totally did this. But it wouldn't have helped. So I had to control myself, which is hard. Kids may apologize and try to make up at this point. They may blame others. You can see a lot of different things. And I would say, think about what this looks like for your child, keeping an eye on health and safety of all involved. If I can, and I know for sure that the child really is in de-escalation, any staff involved, if at all possible, I'm going to try to give everybody a little short break. I'm going to say, you know what, take 10 minutes and then come back, and I'm going to take 10 minutes while they're de-escalating, because for staff's sake, if you're able, not always, it's not always possible, but if I could, I always did try to do that. I'm not going to blame. I'm going to allow them time to cool down. I'm just going to try to, this is a time, hopefully I have established calm down procedures, and I am putting them back through them. So maybe we're working through some of the material from zones of regulation, and they're doing star breathing. For my kids who did independent work, I'm sending them to do something independent on their own. I'm not going to work directly with them right now. Even my kids who were very severe, we typically did independent workstations, and I would send them to independent workstation at the end of a meltdown. When we were at the point to where they were able to go back to work, the first thing that we did was send them through independent workstation, because they didn't need to be paired with another adult at that point. It was not going to be beneficial for anyone. So tips for de-escalation. Tips for de-escalation are stay calm, get on the eye level of the child, beware, monitor your own facial expressions, I had an aide who amped things up because she would look shocked. The kid would cuss like a sailor, little kid. He'd cuss like a sailor. And my aide was a pastor's wife, and she was the sweetest lady in the world. And she would look so horrified at the things that she would say that the kid was get worse. So monitor your face and your body language. Do not try to reason with them. Validate their feelings, right? You feel upset. I can see that you're mad. I don't have to say that I think, I don't have to agree with it, but validate their feelings. Silence is your friend, right? This is the time maybe you're just totally silent. A movement break. If we're in de-escalation, the other thing that I might do was I had kids who would move into some sort of sensory activity. Maybe they did a single point swing for a little while. Maybe they had a lot of pent up energy at that point and I sent them to a trampoline. Maybe they went for a walk if it was safe and we were de-escalated enough that that was an option. Maybe they went for a walk. Keeping that stimulation low. Maybe my lights are down in the classroom. My temperature is cold. If you work in a situation with kids that are aggressive, physically aggressive, if you've ever been to a prison or ever been in a hospital, think about the temperature setting in there. It is cold. There's some research base out there to say that the little bit, keeping that classroom on 65, 67, which is cold. We wore a sweater in my classroom and I kept it really cold because there's some research out there that says a little bit cooler temperature helps keep a little bit calmer demeanor. And then there's reasons why they use that in industrial settings. Consider distraction was the last one I didn't say. Think about some sort of distraction during de-escalation if you can. So debrief and problem solve. This depends on the child, right? I will say that I have to know the child and the setting. And I also have to make sure that I have the right adult in that situation that's able to do this. A lot of my kids, especially my kids who are nonverbal, or my kids who had lower levels of communication, we debriefed as a staff. I completely did this with my staff. I did not always do this with my kids. So just walking through what did you do with the student? I did this with my staff a lot of times. So what, not to them, what did they do, but what did the student do? What did you do? What else could you have done? Just kind of walking through a debrief. It depends on the kids. Some kids, this may amp them back into meltdown. Some kids might be able to talk this through. It depends on your situation and the student. And they have to be totally pretty much calm at this point. So this number 3, what else could you have done that would have met your need, is a replacement behavior, right? I've got to teach them a replacement behavior. How can that student get what they need in a socially appropriate manner so that they're not doing whatever it was that they did again? I have to give them a way to get that without having to do what they did. Critical skills to think about. The goal of a debriefing session is to increase appropriate behavior and focus on problem solving, right? We want to solve the problem. If I'm doing this with an actual student, I'm going to go along the lines of saying, hey, we had this incident today and here's what happened. What do you think we can do? We don't want that to happen. And I know you, the student, you don't want that to happen. Let's figure out what happened so that we can keep that from happening again. They'll be pretty important. Phase 7 is recovery. For some kids, this looks like they're going to sleep. Subdued behavior. They may be really eager to get back to independent work. They want to go back and try to get them back into schedule. As soon as possible, get them back into their normal routine and normal schedule. It'll help them to get back into that place of calm. I think I have said most of these. So here's my rule of thumb. I get asked a lot, what do you think about punishment for kids? What's your belief on punishment with kids? So here's my rule of thumb. If you punish a student, so say kid comes in, kid talks in class, you take his recess. That's the most common punishment that I see. Kids lose their recess. Kid comes in, kid talks in class, kid loses his recess. If that happens, say 2 or 3 times a year, and you have to take his recess 2 or 3 times a year because they talked in class and they were disruptive, then taking their recess is probably the right response, right? They're talking, you punish them, and the behavior changed. Most of the time, they're not talking in class, right? For kids that you come in and they talk, you punish them by taking their recess, and then they come back in the next day and they talk some more. They come back in and they're still doing that same thing over and over, then punishment's not working, or that punishment isn't working, right? Yes.
What are some other forms of punishment besides just taking away things and making
I like natural consequences.
I did that with most frequently, but I also think breaks and sympathetic support. I don't know what to do.
So probably if it's something that's happening a lot, then you need to teach them a skill to get whatever it is that's happening. Does that make sense? So probably punishment won't work. That's the thing, is if you're punishing and you're having to punish over, is it the same kids, right? So you're having to punish the same kids over and over, then it fits the definition of an insanity, right? It just doesn't work. So punishment might not be effective. That's my guess, is it's not being effective. So you have to fall back on that, teach something. So teach them some kind of replacement behavior. You need to figure out what it is that's happening. So if you want to catch me when we're done and tell me, I don't want you to tell me over the, yeah, but tell me and we'll walk through and we'll try to figure it out. I don't know that I will, no promises, but we can at least take some good guesses and help you get down the road, because that's probably what it's going to come back to. If you're having to punish over and over, and a lot of kids, we see that kids engage in the same behaviors over and over. And it's because they don't have whatever that skill is, whatever it is, they don't know how to do it to get what they need. So it's figuring that piece out. That's the critical piece. So if you punish and you need to punish occasionally, so once a month, once a few times a year, maybe it's this really rare thing and then you've punished and it fixes it, then that probably is the right way to go, right? I was a kid, I got sent to the principal's office one time in my entire life. I never went again. And my principal was a really nice person. I don't think he said anything to me. I don't think anything like that at all. I never wanted to go there again, right? So it was totally the right thing for me. I lost my recess because I refused to learn cursive writing. I said it was the stupidest thing ever. Which I use it all the time now, funnily enough. But she took away my recess one time. I gave in like halfway through. I was like, this sucks. I like recess. I want to go. I know how to get there. I just need to learn to write cursive. And it was something that I could do, right? So then punishment makes a lot more sense in that circumstance. So if you're seeing that you're having to punish over and over the same kids, especially if it's for the same reasons or they're doing the same thing over and over, then it's a skill deficit. There's some skill that they're missing, right? That's my guess anyways, is there's a skill deficit there. So you got to go back to teach something. Yes.
We've got a question in the chat. And
Okay.
it is, what are examples of natural consequences?
So natural consequences. Natural consequences I use for a lot of my kids. Natural consequences are, I would fall back on, you didn't, so I'm asking you to do let's say math. Sorry, I hate math. Sorry, Stephanie. Let's say I'm asking a child to do a math activity. And I know it's an appropriate math activity. It's something that they can do. It's a reasonable expectation. I'm asking them to do these 5 problems or these 10 problems before we go outside for recess. Then the child just stubs up and refuses to do those problems. Then the natural consequence is, we're going to finish these problems. And then maybe you're still going to go to recess. Maybe you're not. Maybe the time is gone. It depends on the child and the situation, if that makes sense. A lot of times for a lot of my kids, I fell back on positive reinforcement. So I fell back to like a token chart. Let me see if I have an example of one. In my handy dandy, I do. So a lot of my kids, I would fall back to something like this. I don't know if they can see that online. It's a token chart. They can see. Okay, good.
Yeah, you can step a little closer.
Okay.
And they'll be able to see it.
All right, guys. So a token chart, right? So I don't want to have to give out a Reese every time, a M&M every time a child does something that I want them to do. I can't give them something all the time. That I'm moving to a token chart. So a token chart, I'm going to have to teach this, but the way that it works is when I fill in the 3, then the student gets what they want. So a natural consequence, if you have a token chart, is you don't earn the token, right? So Kim's working for chocolate or ice cream. It's always food. That's what's going to be on what am I working for? It's going to be food. So for kids, if I'm teaching this, I'm going to start out with 2 things already filled in, right? So they're still getting one-to-one correspondence. So if I'm asking them to do a math problem, maybe they're getting a token for every problem. So maybe my token chart is bigger. It depends on your student. It depends on their age. It depends on their cognitive level. And it depends on the level of reinforcement that they're used to, right? It depends on there's a lot of factors in there, but a token chart, and it doesn't have to look like this. It can look like 1,000 things. So the child does a math problem and I say, nice job, look at you doing that math problem. Here's your M&M. I'll stick with food because it's me. Here's your M&M. Well, he's got 5 math problems. So eventually what I want to say is he's going to have 5 tokens and he's going to earn a token for every math problem. And then he gets the reinforcement. So the natural consequence of not doing the math problems is he doesn't get any tokens. So he can't get the reinforcement. Does that make sense? It's like if we decided not to go to work. Like I decided, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to take any sick days. I'm not going to take my vacation days. I'm just not going to show up for a while. And so eventually I wouldn't get paid anymore. A lot of times for kids with disabilities, they need some sort of external reinforcement. So some sort of reinforcement's powerful, right? Highly motivating. It's something that we'll talk about really soon. Or maybe I'll skip it since we're talking about it now, but reinforcement is highly powerful, motivating thing that you need to know about for kids with disabilities. And probably most of you all already do, but knowing to encourage your teachers and your aides, people who are working directly with kids. Token charts fail a lot. I have people tell me, I tried that sticker chart thing and it doesn't work. If it's not working, then it's because you're asking them to do too much for them to be successful, or what they're working for isn't motivating enough, right? And I tell people, would you run a mile for $5,000? I might. I mean, I can't run. If I'm running, it's a bear, right? You all need to run too. But for $5,000, that might motivate me to run a mile. I would at least give it a really good try. I might die at the end, but I would try for $5,000. But if you said, you know what, Kim, I'll give you $50 if you run a mile, I'm not running a mile for that, right? So just figuring out the balance level for kids. And it takes time. It does take a little bit of time and a little bit of work. Okay, 4 key strategies. Teach and reinforce expected behavior. So what's the expected behavior of the classroom, of the situation that you're in? What are the social skills? Identify early intervention. Intervene early in that escalating behavior cycle. And then identify environmental factors that can be manipulated. So maybe in my gym, we moved the location of the basketballs. We didn't bring them out until after that part was done. Small modification, big payoff. I had a student who ran and would run away from the classroom. And so we modified the environment we didn't block the door, but we put up some obstacles before he got there. On one side of the door was a shelf that just about 3 or 4 feet high. And then so it made it a less direct access to get to that door to run out. So we modified the environment a little bit. And then identify replacement behaviors. If we're telling them to stop doing something, then we need to give them something else they can do. We spend a lot of time telling kids, you can't do this, stop that behavior, stop whatever it is, but we need to tell kids what they can do. So this just brings us back to that escalating cycle. Normally in this, we would review this with teachers at this point, but I'm going to go ahead and keep on trucking. Okay, proactive strategies. I know most school districts have some sort of positive behavior intervention plan school-wide. Emphasize with your teachers that teaching and prevention strategies is a good place to start. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of things. So we won't do this. This is actually time to action plan. We won't do this because I know a lot of you are administrators. Resources, these are great places to go. Good places to start if you're looking for more information. This is like the tip of the iceberg, right? We could talk about behavior for the next 6 years and not cover it all probably. Okay, what I do want to do, and I'm running out of time, sorry guys. I do want to talk about tools for your toolbox. I do want to make sure that you walk away at least with a few things that you can take back today and use immediately. So antecedent-based intervention, if we talk about that ABCs of behavior, Antecedent-based interventions are the A part, right? These are interventions that you put into place before any behavior has occurred. I don't need to wait for there to be a problem to intervene. This is exactly the place you need to start. These are good behavior-based practices for all kids, and I use these with everybody. I use these in my Sunday school classroom. I use these in my home. I use these with my students. These are usable for everybody, regardless of if you have autism, if you have a disability, if you don't. These are just good practices. Setting clear behavioral expectations, and you have to teach them. Considering the needs of individual learners when you're delivering those expectations. So knowing for some kids, they're going to need a visual support. For other kids, maybe their clear expectations are very small. Maybe we're keeping those short and for very few to help them be able to do that. Manipulate the learning environment. So pairing the environment with reinforcement, knowing that we need good things to happen there. So thinking about some sort of positive reinforcement for kids. Providing visual supports in the environment. Visual supports are huge and a great place to start. They're one of our foundational pieces. So when I come into a classroom, I'm looking for, do they have visual supports? I'm looking for, do they have antecedent-based interventions into place? Those are the key factors for a lot of kids. And knowing that when I put a new intervention into place, you need 6 weeks. A lot of times teachers will come back and say, I tried that first then board, I tried that visual support, it did not work. You need 6 weeks. It takes 6 weeks. If you think about we're changing behavior, it takes a long time. You need 6 weeks to tell if it works or not. And you have to make sure that you're teaching it and everybody's using it the same way across the board, which is hard sometimes when you're working with multiple people. Other things that you can do, decreasing and altering the task demand. I worked in a 4th grade classroom, and the homework in 4th grade classroom, no, sorry, 5th grade. The homework in 5th grade classroom was 50 multiple digit math problems every night. 50 multiple digit math problems, 50. So for my kids, we did 5 because 50 problems, I had a parent call me and say, we're going to still be doing the same 50 problems next week because it took her kids so long to go through each of the steps and do it accurately. And they weren't allowed to use a calculator. And the parents had to say they were not using a calculator. So 50 math problems was too much. So we had to fix that for those kids. Priming is I'm telling kids what I need them to do right before they do it. Priming is when we come back to teaching those routines and rules. Priming is the place to go. So I'm reminding you of what I need you to do right before we do it. When I taught the last classroom setting that I was in, our playground the fence was a bullpen. Of course, we had a really nice playground. There's no other fence. There is a big fence that's a cow pasture that's electric. It has barbed wire on the top, and there is a 2,000-pound bull inside of that. So we could not play on the grass because the bull would come to the fence. Sometimes he would bust the fence and come out onto the playground. So we could not go near the bull. It was terrifying. And the fence was electric. So I don't want my kids to be shocked. I do not want to call parents and say, Johnny got shocked today. No. So I primed my kids every time we were going out to the playground. I reminded them of the rules right then. In the beginning of the year and throughout the year. So the rule was we only played where the wood chips were at. Before the school year, every year, because sometimes the wood chips change color, I would go out, I would scoop up a handful of wood chips, bring them into my classroom, and I kept them in a Ziploc baggie every day before we went to the playground, every day for my kids. I would say, all right, guys, in the beginning, I would tell them the rule. In the beginning, I would say, the rules are, we only play where the wood chips are. We don't put our feet on the grass. The first few times, the first few weeks of school, when we would go up to the playground, we would walk where the wood chips are. I would point it out. I would really emphasize, these are wood chips. We only play where the wood chips are. We do not play in the grass. The grass is off limits. As the year progressed, then I would tell my kids, I would hold up the bag and I would say, all right, guys, who remembers what the rule is for the playground? Wood chips. We only play where the wood chips are. And if I had a kid who didn't follow that policy, who would run in the grass, and I did over the years, then that kid had a piece of cardstock or something else with wood chips glued on it, and they would touch the wood chips. And then they specifically, some adult would sit with them, like not sit, but right before, as we were lined up to go out, they would say, what's the rule? Wood chips. We only play where the wood chips are. And they would touch the wood chips. And I made sure they had someone with an extra eye on them before we would get to the playground. So priming is telling kids what you need them to do right before they do it. It's a really good thing. Behavior momentum is building up. So I'm going to make sure that kids have success before they do something challenging. So a lot of times, if you are a child with disability, you experience failure all the time, right? And if you think about the reality of our lives, if I do something and I fail at it, I'm going to stop doing it, right? As an adult, I'm going to quit that. Totally going to quit that because I don't do it well. So I'm going to stop doing that. So kids with disabilities, they experience failure all the time, and we make them keep going, so they quit. So here's what I tell teachers: give them something successful first. For some of my kids, in the beginning, that meant I used to say, touch your nose. I don't say that because of COVID. Now I would say, touch your head, because they could touch their head. Then I would say, all right, what color is this? Giving them 2 color choices. For other kids, I had a student who was in upper high school, and he was learning different math problems. They were very hard. I couldn't help him with them. I was not beneficially helpful. I could follow steps, right? So what we did do was he was very successful with the math problems that they had just finished before that. So every day before he did the problems that were hard, we went back and did a problem or 2 that I knew he would get right. I knew he would get those right. So then he had success before we did the hard thing. And I think that's really important to know for our kids. Place specific demands, and we've already talked about that one. Offering choice. Choice is powerful. And I say adult controlled choices, thinking these out ahead of time. So like my kiddo who had oppositional defiant disorder, 2 different seats, 2 different pencils. Are you writing with the purple pencil or the yellow pencil? Because I don't care as long as you write, right? Are you going to work with Miss Joy or Miss Alicia? Because it really didn't matter. 2 different adults. They needed a one-on-one person with them for whatever activity. It didn't matter, but it gave them control. A lot of times with kids with disabilities, we see a lot of teachers will say, they just want to have the control. They just want to have the control. And they do. They just want to have the control. And so this gives you a way to give them back some of the control. Maybe if you're in a self-contained setting and you're going to do 3 activities and it doesn't matter what order the activity is in, maybe you let the kid pick. Which one do you want to do first? I had a child who was completely nonverbal, very low level academic skills. And he did not, it was a challenge to get him to come and work with me. And I started letting him pick. We did structured workstations, but he got to pick which one he did first with me during teacher time. I thought when I said, hey, you pick today, what do you want to do first? I didn't know if he could choose. I didn't think he would actually choose, but he spent about 5 minutes looking in every bin and looking at every activity. And then he chose the one that he wanted to do. And it gave me good information, because it told me that these are activities that he does like, and these are activities that I have a harder time getting him to do. And it gave me information on that he could make some choices and that he had a better skill set than I was aware of, just because of some of the scenario and some of the situation. So create a routine. We've talked a lot about routines, but definitely creating that routine, having a set schedule structure, a set pattern and order of the day at school. For a lot of our kids, this is the only place that they can count on a consistent routine. Other things to think about is predictability, and routine definitely helps with that. So answering these questions for kids, especially kids with autism, not knowing what's coming next, not knowing what I'm going to do, not knowing how long is it going to take? Maybe I'm going to do this forever. Creates a lot of anxiety and can amp up kids accidentally without meaning to. So creating that predictability. And I think I've said this, tell kids what they can do. We tell kids all the time what they can't do. Tell them what to do instead. It would be a lot more beneficial if we said, if we told them what they can do. Because if they're not doing what we want them to do, then probably, maybe they don't know. Maybe it's an active choice that they're making, but just stick with the positive side of it. Telling them what they can do will be much more helpful. So contingency maps, I think, is the last thing that I'm talking about. So you have a set of these, I think. Oh, no, I'm talking about one more thing after that. I'll talk quickly. Sorry, guys. Let's see. Maybe. I'll talk about them here. If not, if they're not linked in there, we'll get it later. I won't dig through right now. So contingency maps are super nice place to start. And I have my own set. Sorry, guys, let me shuffle. Okay, so contingency maps give a pathway. So this is what happens, the behavior or the trigger. And this is the green on the, oh, uh-oh. There we go. Woo, pressed the wrong thing. Sorry, guys, scared myself. So here is the trigger. So this is my adult version of a contingency map, right? So my adult version is the trigger is it's summer. I want to look good. My green on the top is my behavior that I want to occur. I want to look good in my swimsuit, right? My natural reinforcer or the consequence is I'm going to look good in my swimsuit. My problem behavior that I engage in is my cake and cookie eating, my ice cream eating. It's a significant problem. My natural occurring outcome is I don't look as good as I want, right? I'm not going to look as good as what I wanted in my swimsuit. So what does this look like for kids? So a good kid version of this is, let's see, this is a contingency map for, I'm working with my teacher. Sorry, guys, let me move up. I don't know. Can you see? Okay, so contingency map, and this is one that I bought and printed. These are free, the contingency map up there, and I think they're in the link. Okay, if not, yeah, they're put in the link. They're going to put the link in the chat for you. So I am working with the teacher. That is our behavior or our trigger. The green choices on the top are the things that you want to happen. I can raise my hand and ask for a break, and then I can take a break in the beanbag chair. Here's the things you don't want to happen. I run away. I don't ask for a break. I don't get the beanbag. So this is a child who's running away and not getting the break that they want. So a contingency map shows us the pathway to get what it is that we want. It's a visual way to help kids make a choice on behavior. I do like it. And there's 1,001 out there. Yes.
So the contingency map, we think about that when we talked about that in elementary, but can you use this with
Absolutely.
middle school, with high school kids?
Absolutely.
So it could be.
It doesn't have to be in pictures. It could be words.
Right.
It could absolutely be words. The example in there has pictures with it, but I have used this written. You can use this. You can just put a sticky note on it, right? And there's in that copy, there's a blank set, right? This one is kind of for the adults who are using it as a prompt on how to use it. You can use this with any age. You can pretty much use this with any age. So the green pathway is the path to get what the teacher wants, right? Or the adult needs to happen. The bottom one that's in red is the behaviors that the child is engaging in that doesn't get them. So if I want to get if my goal is I want to get a break and I run away, well, then I'm not getting a break. But if I want a break, then I could ask for a break by using a socially appropriate method. So for my kids, we had break cards to where they could ask for a break just with a little cue card, right? So it gave them an option to say, I don't want to do this right now. We'll talk about that when we do the teacher version of this. I'll bring those and we'll make those with them. But I think contingency maps are good. Oh, I had a whole one. I didn't realize to put that in there. So when the computer is finished, Andrew waits his turn and takes a deep breath. Then he gets another turn at the computer. That's what's across the top, right? The red choices are if Andrew cries and he doesn't wait his turn, then the consequence is he doesn't get another turn on the computer. He's done with it, right? So it just shows you the pathway to get what you want. Okay, last thing. So, and I'm not going to talk through these very much. I just wanted you to have them. This is more of a resource. These are in the links. These are great resources. So we've talked a lot about ABCs of behavior. We've talked a lot about taking data and figuring out what to do. These are another freebie. So it starts out with general questions. So you're thinking about whatever the behavior is, and you're thinking, does this behavior present itself in isolation? So when the child's alone or in a classroom without a lot of other people around them, do they still engage in this behavior? Does the behavior occur more than 10 times a day? And at the bottom, it gives you suggestions of have you tried? And I'm going to flip to the next one. There in the set, there are several. of these, but is it sensory-based? So helping you figure out, is this a sensory-based function? Is this an attention-based function? Is this access to a tangible function? So it just is sort of a starter set on trying to figure that out. I just thought it was a good resource, and I like to make sure that you have that. And I'll stop. So this is my email, and we are done. I will tell you that one of the things that we do offer, and one of the things that we partner with KVEC on is we come out and see class sites. So if you have students with autism, they have to be autistic. If they're very young, preschool age, kindergarten, first grade age, and they're not diagnosed, either school-based diagnosed or medically diagnosed, then we have some flexibility if you suspect autism. But we come out and spend a year with you. We'll come out every month and provide support for kids in the regular setting. It can be kids who are in the self-contained moderate and severe disability setting. We have a lot of flexibility in that. And that's something that we'll talk about at a DOST meeting later on. But just know that that's out there if you do need some additional support. And I am done. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if this is still on.
Kim. I'm going to put this on the screen for those of you. Here is both our, and this should be on your shared screen. So we thank each of you that have been here with us and participated today. We're asking if you didn't get to sign in, we had that sign in link. So in the blue is the sign in. So in case any of you did not get signed in for the session today, you can hover over that with your iPhone and get, it'll bring you to a link, and you just click that link and get signed in. And then we have a feedback form. So we'd like to have your feedback for the participation today, and kind of give us some feedback on, what you need and how we can continue to support that here at KVEC. And we appreciate Kim with the Kentucky Autism Training Center coming here today and making this session available. We have a session scheduled for December 2nd. And we're getting ready to send that link out. And Kim's going to do a make and take session here at KVEC. And teachers can come here. And I think we'll probably have to limit that to maybe the first 40 or 50 participants, but they'll be able to make some of these tools and resources that she's talked about today to take back to their classroom and to use. So we'll send that one out to you soon, that you'll be looking for that registration. So if we have principals, administrators on here, other teachers on here that want to participate, we'll have that available. So just hold that in your calendar. December 2nd, we do have the room secured, and you'll have an opportunity to make some of those things that Kim has shared with us. And that could be even appropriate for older kids too. And like I said, we're talking about, if we see an example of something here that maybe we would modify, would be more appropriate for middle school or more appropriate for high school, because I think we still talk about those classroom procedures and routines, and then how do we teach kids how we can use those visual symbols and supports for kids, older kids that are more appropriate for that age.
If you can filter out who is elementary, who is not, I'll bring stuff specifically for secondary. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
yeah, so,
If you know you have some coming, I'll try to make sure we bring stuff.
okay, so Kim was just saying for our December training, she's going to make sure that we have some things specific for secondary or high school. We'll have some things specifically for middle school, and then for elementary school teachers. So she'll kind of teach us all how to do that process. And you have access to the PowerPoint and all of the resources today. Those links are connected to this document that was in the email that I shared with you.